The man in the shadow. They say that everyone has seen him at least once in their life. That fleeting figure you glimpse out of the corner of your eye, only to turn and find nothing there. The man in the shadows. I thought he was just an urban legend, something people whispered about in late night conversations to scare each other. But then I started seeing him. It began a few months ago. In my new apartment, I would be brushing my teeth or reading in bed, and I'd catch a glimpse of movement just outside my line of sight. At first, I ignored it. I told myself it was just my imagination, or maybe a trick of the light. But then, one night, I saw him fully. I had been lying in bed, half asleep, when I felt a strange heaviness in the room. I opened my eyes, and there he was, standing in the far corner, just outside the glow of my bedside lamp. He was tall, with limbs that seemed too long, and a face that was lost in shadow. I froze, hoping that if I stayed still, he would disappear, but he didn't. He just stood there, silent and still, watching. Eventually, I fell asleep from sheer exhaustion, but when I woke up, he was gone. I tried to convince myself it was a dream, but every night after that, he would return, always in the same spot, always watching. One night, I decided I'd had enough. I gathered the courage to sit up and speak. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice trembling. For a moment, there was silence, and then, in a voice that sounded like dry leaves scraping against pavement, he answered, "I'm waiting." The words sent a chill down my spine. Waiting? For what? I asked, but he was already gone. After that, he got closer each night. First, he was at the foot of my bed, then, standing beside it. And last night, I woke up to find him crouched, right next to me, his face inches from mine. This time, I could make out more details: hollow eyes, a mouth twisted in a grin that stretched to wide. "I'm waiting for you to see me," he whispered, and then he faded, leaving the room darker than before. Now, every time I close my eyes, I feel him closer, like he's slipping into my mind. I see him in every shadow, lurking just beyond my vision. I don't know how much longer I can avoid him, because each time I blink, he's closer than the last. And I think, soon, I'll finally see him. The voice in the static. There's something odd about radio static. I'd noticed it since I was a kid. A subtle hum in the background, almost like a whisper. My mother used to keep the radio on low all night. She said the white noise helped her sleep. But I'd hear something else. A voice, faint and hidden beneath the crackling, that would come through in the dead of night. I dismissed it as my imagination, a trick of sound. But recently, I started hearing it again, clearer and louder. When I moved into my new apartment, I thought maybe it was the old walls or interference from some busted appliance. But this time, it wasn't a whisper. It was a conversation, and it knew my name. The first night, it was just a few words, breaking through the static in the middle of a storm. "Are you there?" It crackled. I turned off the radio immediately. The apartment was silent, the kind of heavy, thick silence you feel deep in your bones. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, like something was just on the other side of that radio, waiting. Every night after that, the voice returned, each time clearer and closer. And then one night, as I was lying in bed, paralyzed with fear, it whispered, "Come closer." Against every bit of common sense I had, I found myself moving toward the radio, compelled by a pull I couldn't understand. As I leaned in, the static sharpened, and I could make out words with terrifying clarity. "Let me in." I jumped back, slamming the radio off, but even after I cut the power, I could still hear it, like it was seeping from the walls. "Let me in," it hissed, louder, angrier. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I threw the radio in the trash, feeling a surge of relief as it was crushed by the garbage truck. But when I returned to my apartment that evening, the radio was sitting on my kitchen counter, perfectly intact. That night, it was louder than ever. "You can't get rid of me," it taunted, its voice sharper and more human than I had ever heard. It knew things about me, things I had never told anyone. It laughed as I backed away, calling my childhood fears by name, mocking every insecurity, and revealing secrets I thought I'd buried. And then, in a voice that was unmistakably my own. It whispered, "You invited me." Now, every time I hear a radio, even if it's just a passing car, I hear it calling me, begging me to return to that room, to that static. And sometimes, I feel an urge so strong it nearly pulls me off my feet. I don't know how much longer I can resist. The empty reflection. It started with a mirror, a plain, antique mirror I picked up at a garage sale. There was nothing remarkable about it, just a thin, silver frame and the glass surface that, when polished, gleamed almost too brightly, something to make the narrow space seem wider. The first time I noticed something was wrong, I had just finished hanging it. I took a step back to admire my handiwork, and for a split second, I saw something move in the reflection. It was subtle, just a flicker of darkness, like a shadow passing behind me. I turned around quickly, but of course, nothing was there. I chalked it up to my eyes playing tricks on me. Over the next few days, I started feeling off. I'd catch glimpses of myself in the mirror, and swear my reflection lingered. A moment longer, I'd see it tilt its head when I hadn't, or blink when my eyes were wide open. I convinced myself it was stress, too much work, not enough sleep, but I started avoiding the mirror anyway. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I found myself staring into it. My reflection stared back, expressionless, eyes slightly too wide. I leaned in, heart pounding. "Stop it," I whispered to myself. The reflection didn't move, and then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it smiled. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping. The smile faded from the reflection's face, and it stared at me, unblinking. My mind was racing. I left the room, shutting the door behind me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of those eyes. The next day, I covered the mirror with a sheet. I couldn't bear to look at it. That night, I was jolted awake by the sound of glass shattering. I ran to the hallway, and my heart sank. The sheet lay crumpled on the floor. The mirror was uncovered, its glass intact, but the reflection was gone. I stood there, staring at an empty mirror. The whole way, nothing was reflected. It was just a void. And then I heard it, footsteps, soft and slow, behind me. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. When I turned back, the mirror was normal again. My reflection was there, staring at me, but something was wrong. I raised my right hand. It raised its left. I stepped back. It stepped forward. And then, with a sudden, violent motion, it slammed its hand against the glass, cracked spider webbing from its fingertips. I stumbled back, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. The glass rippled like water, and my reflection pressed against it. Its smile too wide, its eyes too bright. "I'm free," it whispered, as it stepped out of the mirror and into my world. I ran. I locked myself in my room. I don't know where it is now, but sometimes I hear it, moving through my apartment, mimicking my voice, calling out to me. I don't know how much longer I can hide. If you see a mirror, cover it, or better yet, get rid of it. Because sometimes, the things on the other side want to come out, and if they do, they'll wear your face like a mask and nobody will ever know the difference. The Whispering Woods. There's a stretch of forest just outside my hometown that everyone knows to avoid after dark. They say it's dangerous, filled with jagged terrain and wild animals. Others have a different story. They call it the Whispering Woods. I'd heard the stories growing up, tales of people who went in at night and came out wrong. Some wouldn't speak for weeks. Others would be found miles away, dazed and wandering. A few were never found at all. The whispers, they said, were what did it. If you heard them and listened too closely, you'd lose yourself. But, of course, I didn't believe any of it. That changed when my best friend Mike disappeared. We'd been out late one night, walking back from a party, when he dared me to cut through the woods. I laughed it off, but he ran ahead, yelling over his shoulder that I was a coward. The trees swallowed him up, and I stood there for a moment, debating. I should have turned back, but I didn't. I followed him. The moment I stepped into the forest, the air changed. It was heavy, damp, and unnervingly quiet. "Mike," I called. No answer. I walked deeper. "Come on, man. It's not funny." Still nothing. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper. "Help. The voice was weak, familiar. "Mike," I called. The whisper came again, from somewhere deeper in the woods. I followed it. The deeper I went, the louder the whispers became. But they weren't just one voice anymore. "Turn back," they hissed. "Stay, leave, listen." The whispers seemed to come from everywhere. I frantically tried to pinpoint their source. Shadows moved between the trees. My pulse raced. For a moment, the whispers stopped, replaced by a deep, heavy silence. Then, Mike stepped out. His face was pale, his eyes wide and unblinking. "Mike, I thought you." I stopped. Something was wrong. His lips moved, but the words didn't match. "Help me," he said, in that same weak voice I'd heard earlier. His mouth kept moving, forming words I couldn't hear. The whispers surged, louder now, deafening. "Listen," they screamed. The shadows moved closer, and I realized they weren't shadows at all, they were people. Pale, hollow-eyed figures with expressions frozen in terror. They reached for me. I stumbled and fell. When I looked up, Mike was inches away, his breath icy on my skin. "Don't, listen," he whispered, and then his face twisted, and he screamed. I scrambled to my feet and ran, crashing through branches and roots, the whispers chasing me. When I burst out of the woods, the night air was sharp and clear. The whispers stopped. I turned back, but there was no sign of Mike or the pale figures. A week later, search parties found a body deep in the woods. They said it was Mike, but I knew better. I saw his eyes when they pulled him out wide, unblinking, and empty. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still hear the whispers, faint and pleading, just beyond the edge of the trees, and I know they're waiting, calling for anyone who dares to listen. The house that hums. There's a house on the edge of town everyone avoids, old and crumbling. It hums a low, steady drone just beneath hearing. Growing up, I dismissed it as folklore meant to scare us. But one bored Saturday night, my friends and I decided to investigate. The hum met us as soon as we stepped onto the overgrown lawn, vibrating through the air and into our bones. "It's just whined through the cracks," someone muttered, but no one believed it. Inside, the air was thick with rot. Dust coated every surface. The hum was louder, pulsing through the walls and floorboards, resonating in time with my heartbeat. It wasn't random. It was calling, luring us deeper. We found ourselves in a decayed living room where a trapdoor lay half open, emitting the hum. We hesitated, but something compelled us to approach. Mark, one of my friends, pulled it open, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. The cold air intensified as we stepped down into a stone chamber. In the center stood a pedestal with a shimmering black stone that pulsed with the hum. I whispered, "Don't touch it." But Mark, eyes wide and blank, ignored me. The instant his fingers met the stone, the hum erupted into a deafening scream. The ground shook, and black tendrils snaked from the stone, coiling around him. Mark convulsed, his eyes turning black as his mouth emitted a deep, inhuman hum. "It's awake," he said, his voice layered with others. Shadows writhed around us. We tried to pull him away, but he was rooted in place. The stone pulsed again, and the shadows grew. We fled, leaving Mark behind. I don't remember escaping, just that I ran until I couldn't breathe. By morning, the house was sealed tight, the hum replaced by a suffocating silence. No one dared go near it again. But sometimes, late at night, I feel it, the faint vibration beneath my skin, the echo of that ancient hum. Whatever woke in that house isn't done. It's waiting. And I hear Mark's voice in the whispers, pleading for a help. But by then, it's already too late.
The midnight feed. When I was a child, my grandmother told me about the midnight feed, a grim tradition from her hometown. Every family left a bowl of raw meat outside on the darkest winter night. If they didn't, they'd hear scratching at their windows and those who looked would be taken. I thought it was just another creepy tale, but after my grandmother passed, I inherited her house in that town, at the edge of dense woods. As winter approached, the townspeople grew anxious, closing shops early and locking doors. No one would say why, but I remembered her story when I heard scratching at my window. It began softly, like tree branches brushing the glass, but grew louder each night. By the longest night of the year, It was a relentless clawing. I bolted my doors, fear gripping me as I recalled my grandmother's warning. It couldn't be true, could it? At midnight, the scratching stopped. Relief washed over me, but then a low, guttural growl echoed from the woods, vibrating the walls. I grabbed a flashlight and peered outside. A tall, thin shadow with limbs bending at impossible angles stood just beyond the tree line. My light flickered, and I stumbled back, slamming the door shut. The scratching resumed at the front door, more desperate this time. Whatever it was, it wanted in, and it wasn't just an animal. Panic surged. I dumped raw meat scraps into a bowl and threw it outside. Before slamming the door again, I pressed my ear against it, heart pounding. The scratching stopped. Moments later, wet, grotesque chewing began, followed by low growls. I collapsed, shaking. The chewing continued until dawn. When morning came, I saw deep claw marks etched into the doorframe. It was real. I tried warning the townspeople, but they already knew. They'd been making offerings for generations, too afraid to stop. This was their tradition. No one wanted to find out what happened if you failed to feed the thing in the woods. Winter came again. I placed meat outside before dusk, hoping it would satisfy whatever lurked beyond. But at midnight, the scratching returned louder, more insistent. I peeked outside. The offering lay untouched. My stomach dropped as I realized the truth. It didn't just want meat anymore. Now, every night, the scratching comes, accompanied by whispers and threats. I know I'm running out of time. When the next longest night arrives, nothing I offer will be enough. The midnight feed is hungry, and it's growing hungrier with each passing year. If you hear scratching at your window, don't look. Leave whatever it demands and hope it's enough. But be warned, the more you feed it, the hungrier it becomes. And one day, it may want more than you can give.
The Static Man. It began with static. One night, as I was flipping through TV channels, a screen froze on a storm of white noise. The buzzing filled my apartment, sharp and grating. Just as I moved to turn it off, something shifted. A shadow flickered within the static. It was brief, almost too quick to notice, but it made my skin crawl. I leaned closer, squinting at the screen. The shadow appeared again, a tall, thin silhouette, distorted by the swirling static. I told myself it was my tired mind playing tricks. I turned off the TV and tried to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching me. The next day, things got worse. My phone screen glitched and flickered. The radio buzzed with static, even unplugged. That night, I dreamt of him, the Static Man. He stood at the foot of my bed, an outline of static and shadows. I tried to scream, but my voice was swallowed by the noise. He leaned closer, his featureless face crackling with energy. I woke up drenched in sweat, my ears ringing. As the days passed, the static spread. Streetlights flickered when I walked by. TVs glitched as I approached. Friends noticed my exhaustion, but how could I explain it? I avoided screens, but it didn't matter. I saw his shadow and reflections, heard his whispers at night. The more I tried to block him out, the stronger he grew. One night, in a fit of desperation, I smashed my TV. The shards scattered across the floor, but the static didn't stop. It surged from the broken pieces, swirling into a storm of noise and shadows. He emerged from it taller, more defined, limbs crackling with energy. I ran, but there was nowhere to hide. The lights flickered and died. The air buzzed with electricity. I pressed myself against the wall. "Why me?" I whispered. The Static Man tilted his head as if considering. Then he spoke, not with words, but with distorted sounds and flickering images. I saw faces trapped in static, victims consumed by him, their terror frozen forever. I understood then he wasn't just a shadow. He was the static itself, a being that fed on fear and isolation. He reached for me, and everything went dark. When I woke, I was alone on the living room floor. The static was gone, and the air was silent. I thought I was free, but soon, glitches returned, small at first. My reflection flickered in mirrors. Radios crackled when I passed by. In quiet moments, I hear his whispers, reminding me that he's not finished. He's patient, hungry. If you've noticed flickering screens or heard whispers in static, it's already too late. He's watching, and when he comes, there will be nowhere left to run.
The whispering well. Behind my childhood home lay an old well, half hidden by twisted roots and crumbling stones. My parents warned me to stay away, claiming it was dangerous. As a kid, I assumed they feared I'd fall in. Now, I know better, they feared what lived within. On quiet days, I could swear I heard faint whispers rising from the depths, like a chorus of voices. I dismissed it as wind or imagination until the day my friend Jacob dared me to investigate. One chilly afternoon, we stood at the well's edge. "Bet you won't lean in and listen," Jacob taunted, determined not to back down. I stepped closer, peering into the dark abyss. Cold air wafted up, carrying whispers that seemed almost melodic. "Creepy," I muttered, but Jacob, grinning, leaned in further. His smile faded. His face went pale as he whispered, "It wants out." Before I could react, he stumbled back and ran, terror etched into his features. I was left alone with the whispers, now louder and frantic. That night, Jacob didn't answer my calls. By morning, he was missing. The police combed the woods, but found nothing. I wanted to tell someone about the well, but who would believe me? A whispering well took Jacob sounded insane. Guilt and fear gnawed at me. I stayed away from the woods, but the whispers found me in my dreams, calling, begging for release. Karma. The pull became irresistible. At dusk one evening, I returned to the well. The air around it felt heavier, darker. As I leaned closer, the whispers crescendoed into a desperate chorus. "Help us," they pleaded. My hand, trembling, touched the stone rim. Cold, bony fingers shot up, seizing my wrist. I screamed, fighting to break free, but the grip was iron. From the depths, faces emerged, pale, hollow-eyed, their mouths frozen in silent screams. Among them was Jacob. "Join us," the voices chanted, dragging me forward. Summoning every ounce of strength, I tore free and stumbled back. The whispers turned to wails, echoing in my ears as I fled. 4 weeks, I kept to my house, every door and window locked, but the whispers never truly left. They found me in the trickle of rain, the hum of a distant breeze. They were weaker but persistent. I realized a truth: they wanted freedom, and they wouldn't stop until they had it. Years later, I moved far away, but even now, near water, I hear them faintly. No record exists of the well. No one remembers Jacob. It's as if he never existed, erased by whatever dark force dwells below. But I remember, and I know one day I'll be called back. If you ever stumble upon an old, forgotten well, don't listen. No matter how desperate the whispers sound, don't lean in. Once you hear them, they'll never let you go. The shadow in the mirror. It began with a smudge on my bathroom mirror. One morning, I wiped the glass, but no matter how much I cleaned, a dark stain remained, shaped vaguely like a handprint. I brushed it off as a trick of the light until it moved. I'm a fan of creepypasta stories, so naturally, my mind raced to every horror trope imaginable. Mirrors, reflections, and dark shadows all screamed classic haunting. I quickly learned this was something far worse. The next night, as I brushed my teeth, I caught movement in the mirror's corner. There, just beyond my reflection, a shadow flickered, a tall, gaunt figure with glowing red eyes. I turned, but there was nothing behind me. When I looked back at the mirror, it was gone. I barely slept. The shadow returned nightly. It lingered just beyond my reflection, always watching. I tried covering the mirror, but it didn't help. I'd wait to find the sheet torn off, the mirror uncovered, and the shadow closer. I searched online for explanations, scouring creepypasta forums and YouTube videos about cursed mirrors, haunted reflections, and shadow people. Nothing fit what I was experiencing. Desperation drove me to test it. One night, I stood before the mirror and spoke. "What do you want?" The shadow's eyes flared, and its mouth stretched into a grotesque grin. A low, raspy voice echoed not from the room, but from the mirror itself. "Your place." The realization hit me like a punch. It wanted to swap places, it wanted out. I tried to smash the mirror, but my hand stopped inches from the glass, frozen by some invisible force. The shadow laughed. It sounded like nails on a chalkboard. "You can't escape," it hissed. "You invited me." I hadn't, though. I'd never summoned anything unless My fear and obsession with dark, creepypasta tales had somehow drawn it to me. Regardless, it was too late. The shadow grew stronger. Its movements were more pronounced, more confident, as if the boundary between our worlds was weakening. The final night, I awoke to find myself standing before the mirror, my reflection gone. Only the shadow remained. It reached out, its hand pressing against the glass. I tried to pull away, but my body moved on its own, mirroring its actions. Panic surged as I felt myself being pulled skin first through the glass. Cold enveloped me. I screamed, but no sound escaped. The last thing I saw before darkness consumed me was the shadow stepping out, wearing my face. Now, I'm trapped here within the mirror, cold and silent. The shadow lives in my place, wearing my life like a mask. It smiles at my friends, laughs at my jokes. But sometimes, when you catch your reflection, if you look closely enough, you'll see me. I'll be the one screaming, begging you not to trust what you see. So if you ever notice a smudge on your mirror that won't come off, or a flicker in your reflection that doesn't feel quite right, beware. It might be the shadow, it might be me, and if you're not careful, you'll be next. Be sure to like and subscribe for more scary stories.